Well, hi there, I'm Noah Bradley and this is Handmade House TV. On this week's episode we're going to do some jamming. No, that's not jamming with regard to making fruit preserves, nor is that jamming with regard to pulling out a couple of guitars and working together to make some really nice music. That is jamming with regard to those boards that support our logs on both sides of our log cabin door. So stay tuned. Well, all right, if you've been following along here on Handmade House TV, you know that recently I did an episode where I demonstrated the process of creating an opening into your log cabin. It was frequently done, and today the best way, the easiest way to do that is with a chainsaw. And once you have an opening cut, such as a window opening, a door opening, or a fireplace opening, the next step that you want to do is you want to install the jambs on both sides. And if you see behind me, you can see that this door opening has already now been jammed. Quite often, most of the time when we're building a log cabin, we install a rough jamb, and it's basically a 2x material, 2x4, 2x6, 2x8, that is sized properly. And we install that, and then it serves the purpose much like rough framing does in a new standard type construction home, in that it's doing its structural purpose, but it's actually going to be covered over with a finished jamb in the future. If you're building a log home, chances are that's the way you're going to go. But in this particular situation on this little log shed, I'm not going to get but so fancy, so I'm assuming that the rough jamb is going to also be my finished jamb because it's just a shed. But nonetheless, I've chosen some really nice heart pine lumber scraps that I had, and I sized it down. And the way that you size the width of a jamb is that you go to the narrowest point of from the top to the bottom. You want to go with as large of a jamb as you possibly can, but you never want your jamb to extend beyond the faces of the inside or the outside of your log cabin. You never want your trim to be stand out proud beyond the face of your logs. So clearly, if that's the case, then you want to hold your jamb back flush to the logs as well. So that's the first step that I did, and then I cut it to length. I had Nick out here to help me, which was really tremendous. So thank you again, Nick, for a member of the Handmade House Guild, for coming out to give me a hand in doing this. It makes it so much easier to take care of the filming and the actual hands-on work as well. So after sizing the width of the 2x, then we cut them to length. I always cut them a little bit shy of their reach to the top. This allows for any settling in the future, which would be a lot easier to cure if the jamb is not the full length. And then the next step I do is that we check first of all a little bit to see how things are going to lay out, what's ahead of us. And typically what I'll do is that I will nail the jamb at the top first of all, and then I will nail the jamb centered on the log at the bottom. And then the logs that tend to be float or a little bit loose in between, then I will pull them into alignment as best as I can so that they all sort of line up as the cabin goes up. One of the questions that I most often get is what do you use in order to secure the logs in place? What kind of nails or screws or spikes or pegs go into it? And I think that there's a general overall belief in that the best thing you can put in there, the thing that makes the most amount of sense to people, is to actually put pegs in there, where you would bore a hole through the jamb, bore a hole into the end log, and you would drive large pegs in through the jambs and into the log surface. That's the way it's done historically, and therefore it must make sense to do that, and that a nail can't possibly be strong enough in order to do this job. I have had the privilege of actually working on restoring and visiting literally thousands of vintage log homes. And I can say that by far less than half of the real historic homes were done using wooden pegs through the logs, through the jamb and into the logs, and that the performance, the result, the long-term ability of this is that they do nothing to help hold a cabin together, to help pull it together. And that I've seen many cases of failure of the pegs where water will get in behind, rot the pegs out, and therefore they'll break and it'll fall apart. I've seen many cases where logs might have gotten a little bit of resistance from a settling of a pier underneath it, and basically the logs will just pull out of the jamb and pull out of everything. There's not a whole lot of holding power with regard to a peg. And whereas on the other hand, it's surprising how many historic homes that I've gone into that have been nailed together, where nails have been put through the jambs into the ends of the logs, and their performance, their overall track record of doing their job is actually much higher, in my opinion, than what the pegs have been. There's this theory, there's this common belief among so many people, is that iron was much more rare than what it was during the 1800s. Clearly, a lot of metal was being used during this period. So whenever I do that, most typically what I will do is that I will drive on average 5 large nails through the jamb into the ends of the logs. This depends a lot upon how many I use, depends a lot upon the size of the log and the species and how much weight I feel that is really being needed to carry. The strength of a nail is phenomenal, folks. It's amazing how many instances I've seen of a long 2x4 rafter of a porch that was 12 foot long and held in place with one nail. And I've seen a 200-pound young man swing on the end of that rafter with that one nail, and it had been driven over a century ago and it was still there. So nails are strong things. So typically it's 5 nails I put into it, and I try to use something on the fairly large size, such as a 20 or 30 penny nail, which I guess works out to 4 inches, maybe 5 inches long, and pound these things on through. And of lately, screws have definitely come more onto the market in the last, I'd say, 20 years, and high quality screws. And in my opinion, screws very well might do a better job than what nails do. I haven't used screws on many, but I decided to use screws in this particular log cabin because I wanted to achieve the greatest strength I possibly could from these jambs that we installed. And that's primarily because of the tiny little log that I'm using here. It's amazing how much of this log cabin I have cut into because of these door openings, and how this is it's an incredibly strong corner here that would hold 1 billion pounds on top of it and never crush the way it's put together. But nonetheless, because it's such a little wobbly thing, it really needs to be held in place with extra strength. So we went ahead and put 2 huge, strong screws into the ends of each of them. They fought us going into this hard heart of walnut. So I think it's likely that these screws that we have installed through these door jambs, we actually have a stronger log cabin now with the opening in it than before, when it was a log spanning across the whole thing. So anyway, thank you for joining me here on Handmade House TV, where we've been doing some jamming today. Before we go, I'd like to thank 5 new members of the Handmade House Guild. And they are Roberto Cortez, Cindy Wemsley, Mayor and Carolyn Intervera, Tim Davis, and Robert Roberts. What a great name, Robert Roberts. Anyway, they're all great names, and they're all great people. They're all a member of the Handmade House Guild. If you haven't heard, the door is closing for membership into the Handmade House Guild. It was a founding opportunity for individuals to come together in a community of interest in building their own handmade house and be able to receive everything I've ever created or ever will create it. It's been a tremendous bargain. It's a tremendous group. We're going to go on for forever as I continue to produce stuff. But nonetheless, this all-in-one, inclusive, everything I can package to become a part of this community is ending soon. If you're not a member of the Handmade House Guild, We'd really like to have you as a member in it. So please consider joining us, but you got to make it soon because it's closing. I'm serious. Anyway, you guys take care. We'll see you next week here on Handmade House TV. Bye now.